live
video? Okay.
Yeah. It's waiting for City of Sandy Fork. I clicked go live though, so I don't know why it's still waiting.
I want that thing that you go like this, you know, come up in front of us and do that.
Should be good now.
Ready? Okay. We will do it again. We'll officially start the meeting tonight at 7:02, City of Sandy Planning Commission. This is Monday, August 26th, 2019. We'll begin with a roll call.
Commissioner Carlton,
Present.
Commissioner Lasowski,
Here.
Commissioner McLean-Wenzel,
Here.
Commissioner Logan,
Here.
Commissioner Mobley,
Here.
Commissioner Mayton, and he's excused for tonight, and Chairman Crosby.
Here. Okay, we had three separate minutes in our packet to approve. Can we do those with one motion, David, or should we do three?
If there's going to be anybody abstaining,
Okay,
Might
yeah,
be
we'd have
easiest
to
to
do
do
it.
it.
We'll go ahead and do them one at a time. So we'll start with May 28th, 2019 minutes. Any corrections, changes, notations? Okay, if not, somebody will take a motion to approve those.
A motion that we approve the meeting minutes for May 28th.
I'll second it.
Been moved and seconded to approve the May 28th, 2019 minutes. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any abstentions on that one? Everybody was there. Okay, move on to the June 24 minutes. Any corrections, changes, or anything noted there? If not, we'll take a motion.
I move that we accept the minutes of June 24th as presented.
I second it.
Been moved and seconded to approve the June 24, 2019 minutes. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any abstentions?
I have to abstain, I was not at that hearing.
Okay, one abstention. Was not there. Okay, and finally, the July 22 minutes. Any corrections, changes, anything noted in those? If not, we'll take a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the July 22nd meeting minutes.
I'll second it.
Been moved and seconded to approve the July 22nd minutes, 2019. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any abstentions on that one? Oh, everybody was there. Okay.
And we won't fall behind so far next time.
Yes, we think we're caught up.
Yes, correct.
All right, this is the time when we give opportunity for anybody in the room to speak to the Planning Commission on an issue that's not on the agenda tonight. Not seeing anything or expecting anything. We have one item of old business tonight, and just so everybody knows that may be listening, there will be no new business. Old business is a continuation of the public hearing, which we will continue now, 7:05. This is file 18-030, design review, variance, conditional use permit, Funtime RV. Being that it's a continuation, I just need to call for any extra ex parte since the last time that we met on this file. Okay, nothing noted. Right, we just pick up with staff report then, right, David?
That's correct.
Okay, make it simple, James.
All right, I will do my best. We went through this last time, and then I have a couple additional things I wanted to present to you all today. So here's the site as we know it, just on the northwest corner of Beers and US Highway 26. Here is an updated site plan. It includes additional landscape on the south and the east property lines. As you'll see, there's trees, some shrubs, and ground covering within the landscaped area. Additionally, there is a proposed location for a future sign, and then you will see just on the inner side of the landscaping, what look like smaller on this site plan, squares. Those are actually columns for a split rail fence that they are proposing on the site, which we do have a rendering of those in this presentation just a bit. So just as a reminder, the development review did have two options to consider. Option A was to look at the site on its own, which would require minor conditional use and a special variance to eliminate the 50% building frontage. Or option B was to look at the site in conjunction with the existing Funtime RV site, which would require minor conditional use as well as potential variances, deviations, and adjustments. The applicant chose to go with option A, so we're proceeding with the minor conditional use and the special variance. This is a new slide. As you'll know, whenever you reread the updated staff report, there was an interpretation that was provided. Section 1790-110J, which speaks to outdoor storage in the C1 zone district, says exterior storage of merchandise and or materials, except as specifically authorized as a permitted accessory use, is prohibited. Staff has determined that there were two interpretations of this. A interpretation was outdoor storage exceeding 10% cannot be approved per this criteria. Or B would be outdoor storage exceeding 10% can be approved by an approving body such as Planning Commission or City Council. When staff looked at these two interpretations, we proceeded with interpretation A, just looking at different criteria that was within 1790 as well as the allowed uses within the zone district. That's how we proceeded. But as you'll see with Exhibit M, our city attorney, after conversations with staff, did create that additional interpretation for you guys to consider today. So whenever I'm presenting, as well as with the documentation that you have, please keep both of those in consideration for when you make your decision. So when looking at the minor conditional use, I first looked at chapter 1742, which is the C1 zone district. It does permit retail sales of recreational vehicles within buildings up to 30,000 square feet, so we're good on that. Outdoor product display and storage of merchandise is allowed up to 10%, as well as within the minor conditional use, it does allow for a minor conditional use to exceed that 10% outdoor display area. So then we looked at chapter 1790, which is where we did find that 1790J1, which does specifically say, except as specifically authorized as a permitted accessory use is prohibited. Based upon that and the fact that it is a little bit incompatible with some of the criteria of 1790-100D and C, those are the incompatibility and the principles of the design guidelines. We were recommending that the minor conditional use be denied. When we're looking at the minor conditional use approval criteria, we found that B, D, E, and F weren't really driving well with the 1790 design criteria, which is another reason why we were recommending denial. Now, when looking at the minor conditional use recommendation, when we're looking at staff's interpretation versus the alternative, we did recommend denial based upon that J1 prohibits exterior storage, as well as we didn't think it met some of the criteria. But alternatively, if you guys were to choose the alternative B interpretation, we do believe that the additional landscaping and the fencing does add some of those elements that the building might take away. It does add, a bit more pedestrian-friendly visual, softens the pedestrian elements, as well as brings the greenery, as well as the pillars associated with the fencing add to that Cascadian style in the masonry that 1790 is really trying to achieve. Additionally, we did recommend adding a buffer on the north side of the property that would divide this property from the residential that's just to the north of this specific parcel. We do think that would help soften as well for pedestrians as well as those residents to the north. So when looking at the special variance, we looked, and I took it from the code, the building orientation and entrance. That's really in there to maintain and enhance downtown and the village commercial streetscape, emphasize the pedestrian scale, and add the village scale and Sandy style. So when thinking if we could support eliminating that, we were taking this intent into consideration, and we didn't believe that it met the guiding principles of 1, 3, 4, and 5. Those specifically talk about adding those Cascadian styles, landscaping materials that really add to that pedestrian elements. And then Sandy style incompatibility of 1790-00D does have specific things that say it's incompatible, which would be additional paving for surface parking, and then not including the Sandy style thematic architectural styles. 7 and 9 though, I do believe could be included. I did identify 3, 7, 9, and 11 as not being met. 7 and 9 talk about the thematic architecture as well as building materials and color. The pillars and then the split rail fencing that's proposed, I do believe would meet 7 and 9. So please consider that whenever making a determination. So again, staff does recommend denial on the special variance based upon those criteria we were just discussing, the incompatibility and then the guidelines. But something to consider is that landscaping that they have included. It does soften for the pedestrian, does add some of the Cascadian style through the color and the materials. So please consider that when making a decision. So just to kind of wrap things up for final considerations, that interpretation that staff has, that it could not be based upon it being prohibited, or B, the fact that you could interpret it that a governing body such as Planning Commission could approve it, and then it would be a permitted use per code. I did want to show the initial site plan versus the existing proposed plan. The first one didn't include quite as much landscape, nor did it include that additional split rail fencing with the pillars. Just kind of looking at this, you can already tell that they've made quite a bit of steps to come more into conformance with the 1790 standards. And then here is the illustration of the proposed fence. It does have 4-foot pillars or columns, if you'd want to call them, with 2 split rail horizontal rails, I suppose, going between the columns to add this Cascadian styles. This would be behind the landscape, so as the landscape matured, some of it would be covered, but it would also be a barrier for the RVs not to harm any of the landscape, which is something good to consider as well. So with that, staff is summing up and turning it back over to you guys.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for staff right now? Okay. You're on, Tracy.
All right, thank you. I'm Tracy Brown, Tracy Brown Planning Consultants. This is Dean Jerry Fisk, the owner of the property, and I'll go ahead and pass out my notes to you. This is primarily what I'll be going through. Yeah, so, yeah, thank you. And so since we met in May, we kind of regrouped a little bit with the site, and as, I'm blanking on your name. James mentioned, we upgraded the landscaping and also did the decorative fence along the frontage. So what I'm going to go through tonight is there's a couple of code sections that I want to highlight and discuss, and then also I believe 3 of the conditions that are mentioned. So a big, kind of a big deal in all of this is the section 179110J1, which James mentioned, and he cited it, and I'll just read it again. Exterior storage of merchandise and/or materials except as specifically authorized as a permitted accessory use is permitted. And we do agree with the city attorney's alternative interpretation regarding this. And, you know, I had kind of noted that early on in my initial comments on the staff report, and I thought, you know, the language in that does provide some wiggle room, we'll say, for authorizing, for the planning commission to authorize exterior storage. What I'd like to do is kind of look at an alternative to the alternative. And in this alternative that I'm going to present is, I don't think this section applies to our site. So the use that we're looking at, as James mentioned, is a minor conditional use. And that in letter 3 there, the use is outdoor product display or storage of merchandise covering greater than 10%. And so in this language, it kind of tends to distinguish the storage of materials from the display of materials. And so what I'll do is, in my argument here, is that this is not the storage of materials, but it is the display of materials. And so in order to kind of dig deeper into, you know, what the distinction is between these two uses, I looked at the code, and there's no definitions for storage or display. So what we do is look at the dictionary. So at the bottom of page 1, I presented some of the definitions of storage. And basically, as we kind of think of it, it's a place where you put things that are not being used. The state of being kept in a place not being used, the state of being stored somewhere, or, you know, it's basically putting it away until you want to use it. Some of the synonyms of this are warehouse, repository, and so on. On contrast, a display area is one that is there to provide an eye-catching arrangement of something, and it's to be exhibited, making it a prominent exhibition where it can easily be seen. So as we look at the language in 179110J1, it specifically says exterior storage of materials. And so I would argue that our use is not exterior storage. It is a display of RVs for sale. And if we think about RV storage, it's the kind of place typically that, you know, somebody pays somebody to store your RV until you want to use it, you know, 1 week in a year or whatever. So that's a kind of a classic example of RV storage. This isn't that. He wants to put those so he can show people them and display them and sell them. So as we think about, you know, this interpretation, this language is also in chapter in the general commercial zone. And so we can kind of look at, if this is the definition, that every outside display storage is denied, I want you to think about the ramifications of Johnson RV, which was just approved about 4 or 5 years ago. And we didn't really consider that as a problem. That expansion that they did was approved under the same code that this one is. It's in a different zone, but that same language is applicable in that zone as well. The only difference is it allows up to 15% of outside storage in the C2 zone, and in the C1 it's 10%. And then both of the car dealerships, so all of these uses then with this decision would be non-conforming uses. And, you know, a strict read of this would be that there would be no uses to display or store materials that could ever exceed those. And I don't think, I was involved in the writing of this code that is being cited, and that was never the intent of that section. And so I, in summary, we don't think this section applies to the use that we're proposing. We're proposing display. In the alternative, if the the city attorney's interpretation could be followed through, and you feel that that is the most logical way to do it, we would certainly accept that. The other thing, the next one I wanted to go into under number 2 on page 2 there, is regarding the requirement that every use, so we applied for a special variance to that section that's cited there to eliminate the 50% building frontage requirement. And this is kind of premised on an interpretation that every use, no matter what it is required to have a building. And so as what I did in the next paragraph there, I looked at the code in a little further, a little more depth, and some of those uses that are listed there: outdoor recreation, park and ride station, parking lot or garage, a public park, those I don't think would ever have buildings associated with them. And so I think it's an incorrect premise to say that every use in the C1 has to have a building, because it doesn't make sense to require a permitted uses. These are all permitted outright uses. I want to point out that the Civic Plaza, the parking lot behind autos, those were all approved as permitted uses, and none of those had buildings when they were approved. And so to read that as such, then you would be saying that those permitted uses can only be approved with a special variance, and that doesn't make any sense because they are permitted outright. And you cannot, it's an incorrect premise to say a permitted outright use now needs a special variance in order to be approved. So we don't think that that section applies to this use either, because this use is for the sales of RVs and then to increase the area to display them above the 10%. So a couple of the minor items I want to go through in the conditions, and I just kind of copied the conditions out of the staff report. And so the first one has to do with lighting. And so that's the condition number 11 at the bottom of that second page. And it talks about requiring an updated photometric plan. So I wanted to kind of look at that a little bit more carefully. So in the staff report, they looked at a section of the code, and I've listed that in there on page 3, which talks about, it's basically in the chapter, the design section of the code, and it says lighting must be adequate for safety purposes. Walkways, parking lots, and building entrances should be illuminated at 1.5 to 2 foot candles. And so we believe that, so staff has written a condition to say the applicant's plan exceeds 1.5, so it needs to be redone. And we believe that is incorrect read of this section for several reasons. One is, we're not proposing any parking lots, walkways, or building entrances, so it shouldn't apply to this case. The other is, the intent of this lighting section is for safety purposes. And it doesn't make sense, to me at least, why you would have a maximum illumination level for safety purposes and not have a minimum. This section, I believe, is saying that the minimum should be 1.5, not the maximum. Because based on that logic, if this is the maximum and there is no minimum, you could put a parking out there with no lighting whatsoever and that is not a safe condition. And so we believe that the staff is incorrectly reading this, and this should be saying that parking lots, and we'll use the word should, because that's what it says, should be illuminated at a minimum of 1.5 foot candles. Again, the word should is not an absolute standard and shouldn't be used as such. It's just a guideline. You know, we're kind of looking to provide parking lots, walkways with some illumination for safety reasons, and that's the intent of this section. It's not to provide a maximum foot candle reading. In addition, that condition, if you go back to the condition, it has a little, the last sentence says that lighting shall be full cutoff and not exceed 3,000 kelvins. You know, the full cutoff requirement is in the dark sky ordinance, and the lighting plan we submitted complies with all of the standards in the dark sky ordinance, except this 3,000 Kelvin. And this is just an added thing that isn't based on the code. You know, if you read the staff report, it talks about it's intended to help protect wildlife. And, you know, I don't disagree with that premise. And basic Kelvin is kind of the brightness of the lighting. So more of a warm light is the lower Kelvin number, and more a bright, whiter light is a higher Kelvin number. But I guess my concern is that staff is just making up standards and they aren't based on the code. And that's not right. There's, you know, if there was a demonstration that there's, we'll say, a spotted owl's nest or some wildlife that has been identified that needs to be protected, I think the argument could be made through the conditional use criteria that requiring a certain Kelvin level is warranted, but there's no findings to suggest that there's any wildlife in the vicinity of this property that needs to be protected by this lighting. I mean, we don't have a problem with complying. I guess the problem is just kind of making up, staff is making up standards that aren't in the code. And then the last thing had to do with the landscape buffer. So this was staff is recommending an additional 5 foot or a 5 foot buffer along that northern property line. And so in looking at that, I don't know if we can go back to the site plan. So I guess maybe turning to the next page, you can see a picture that I inserted kind of showing that north property line and what is there existing. So the original plan had the proposed storage lot right up to that fence. That fence is partly on the adjacent property and partly on Jerry's property. And so because of the location of the paving, and there's a wall that's going to be along that to level out the property, because of that, it would have compromised that fence. And so I asked the engineer to move that wall away from the fence so we can keep the fence. So staff is recommending an additional 5 feet. I mean, the only problem we really have, I mean, it does reduce the area for display by 5 feet. That's not a huge deal. The problem is the landscaping that would be proposed is now going to be in like this trench, because there's going to be a wall 5 feet away from that fence, and that wall's about 3.5 feet tall, and then you'll have the ground and the landscape buffer and then this fence, and just kind of a cumbersome location. So we're just proposing to keep the fence as is, and we're hoping that you see the logic in doing that and not require the 5 foot additional buffer. I guess the final condition, just, you know, and this isn't a big deal. The staff had recommended that we change the street tree proposed on Beers Avenue. And the only reason I bring this up is, you know, the tree that was picked is on the city street tree list. And they're saying, well, no, pick another tree. And so rather than suggesting another tree and the staff say, well, we don't like that one, I'm suggesting, we're proposing Chanticleer pear, and we'd like to get that approved tonight. So we're not like going back and forth, because I know there's other trees on the approved list that staff is rejecting as well. And it's kind of a difficult, it's a crazy making thing for a developer who's wanting to just get things done. And now they're selecting trees from a list, and now the list is not, they're being rejected from the list. So we request that it just be modified to specify this particular species. This is the species that is in downtown. I think it's a good species, a tree. So anyway, that's our request. So I guess appreciate the opportunity for the comments. You know, after we had the meeting in May, the owner and I met with staff, and we had a pretty good meeting and talked about, and staff had indicated that, yeah, if you beef up things along the street frontage, you know, it would look a lot better. They weren't committing to necessarily approving it or recommending approval. And so, but we did that. You know, I felt like we did a pretty good job, and we got some input from them along the way in terms of particularly the fence that we're proposing. So if I can I'll just walk over that real quick. I just want to kind of highlight. And there's probably, just quickly counting, there's probably about 20 of those posts that James described that go all along, and they're 8 feet apart, that kind of circle the entire site. And this will be faced with a stone type that's very similar to a lot of the stone in the downtown. So we'll kind of have that sandy style feel. So I don't know if you have any questions for me.
Anybody?
I have a quick clarification, I guess. I think I know the answer, but the driveway to Beers Avenue no longer is proposed with a gate?
Right, we're proposing to eliminate the gate. There was originally a condition to make that gate either, you know, like activated or some kind of electronic mechanism, and we, you know, really the main reason for the gate is just, it would be a situation that when they want to move things around, they would open the gate, jockey things around, and then close the gate. And it was primarily for the security, but it wasn't worth the expense to have the automatic mechanism, so we're just going to eliminate the gate.
Is the, what's the grading look like on this when it's all done, Tracy? 'Cause I know it's got a slope on it.
Well, it pretty much, so it kind of slopes to the north like that, kind of in the northwest corner is the low point. And so just the whole site will come up to that point, you know. It will all be pretty much, it will all drain to the north. So there'll be enough gradient for drainage to the north. So it'll look pretty much level. But there's about a 3.5 foot difference between I guess it'd be the southeast corner and the northwest corner.
So the intent's to keep that entire grade though. There won't be any like cut.
No,
There's
so
gonna
there'd
be
be
cutting in walls or anything.
Yeah, well, there'll be a wall along the entire north property line, and it goes from about 3.5 feet in the northeast corner or northwest corner to about a half a foot along the east, and then it goes down about halfway along that west property line. So he currently has, storage right on the other side of the line to the west. That will now be kind of separated because of this wall that will bring up this site. But there will be an area right at the front, where you had the kind of rock area that occasionally they'd put a Jeep or something up there. That will go away. So then there will be ability to maneuver rigs from the existing site to the new site and then out to Beers. Got it, explain it.
Question for staff when that's clear.
Thank you.
All right, thanks.
Tracy, just for the record, what's your address? It wasn't, you didn't say it.
17075 Fur Drive.
Thank you.
And although I don't see any in the room, we will give opportunity for any proponent testimony or any opponent testimony or any additional questions from the audience. If not, we'll go to staff recap.
I have a couple of things to kind of look over. So the alternative to staff's alternative B. So when I read the code, and I'm looking at Mr. Brown's submittal here, it's on the first page under chapter 1742, minor conditional use, and it's verbatim per the code, outdoor product display or storage of merchandise covering greater than 10%. I mean, if you're going to have product display or storage greater than 10%, you have to get that regardless. It's not an and or, but that's the kind of premise of or. So I'm not exactly 100% on what that alternative interpretation was, but I think he's also supportive of alternative B, which that was determined by staff and reiterated by our city attorney, so that would be more than happy from staff's perspective. The notion that every use is required to have a building, that was confirmed with our attorney. The way the code is written currently, even, you know, I'm looking at the use chart right now, a parking lot, public park or plaza, per the way the code is written currently, it would require a building. That's a flaw in our code. Unfortunately, a lot of times with staff, black and white's right in front of us and we have to apply that. This is when I say, as I say most of these meetings, I don't envy y'all's situation or y'all's side. I applied it the way I know to apply it and it was confirmed from our city attorney. So right now those uses would require a special variance to eliminate the building or reduce it.
So-
Here we're looking to reduce it completely.
So what you're applying is essentially a literal interpretation, which,
Yes.
that's literal, okay? And the applicant's suggesting maybe that we could interpret it a little differently.
And that's
what we could do, right, David?
Yeah. That's what alternative B was.
Okay.
Well,
Yeah, I mean, it's like anything else with your land use code, you know, it sort of indicated that in the alternative interpretation, that it's quite often that you're going to have, two different ways of looking at a given standard. That comes up a lot. I mean, for those of you that have been doing this long enough, you probably, recall, a lot of times you're looking at various criteria and kind of going through and saying, well, what does that really mean? So, yeah, I think the interpretation that is in the staff report is looking at it as, well, this is most consistent with what's written. That doesn't mean that another interpretation wouldn't be defensible. That was really trying to get to my point in what the alternative interpretation is.
The one thing that crosses my mind, and that is we went through and we approved the food cart plaza, if you like, or whatever, and there aren't any permanent buildings on that. I mean, everything's mobile. The potties are mobile. So I'm just looking across. I mean, what did we do there? Do you recall? Because it seems like this might apply to that.
I actually didn't approve that, so I don't know the application well enough. I mean, I've looked at the approval, but I don't know the answer to that. I think we just applied it because it was kind of a new use and a new idea, so we were trying to be flexible with it.
Well, I mean,
But
yeah,
I don't know what the staff report said to that.
Well, I just, back to just common sense for a second, if you look at what is intended to be, it all makes all kinds of sense, okay? And I think that's what the applicant was saying in this particular case, so. Not to interrupt your staff report, but since there's two major things you're talking about, that's one of them. That's one of their contentions, is it doesn't apply. Or we could say that it doesn't apply, given this use.
Logically, and I would agree, a building wouldn't apply to a parking lot.
Yeah. Yeah,
Also.
And it's a parking lot.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, unless it's a parking garage.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, a lot of these uses actually, I agree, in Sandy, they typically wouldn't have buildings associated with them. But the use itself, like a park and ride or a parking lot, those uses do have buildings a lot of times when you're in larger cities. And not like Portland, but even like cities the size of, Tigard or Corvallis or something like that. So, I don't know. I mean, I think what David brought up is the correct point in that we read it to, it says right at the beginning of that, of section B, is that all the uses below this are within buildings. I don't know how else you read it, to be honest. Now, some of those uses, I do agree with Tracy, aren't typical, especially in Sandy, to have a building associated with them. But I think really the use section needs to be updated, not the reading of what staff's, or not the interpretation, I guess. I think just the code needs to change. Like, if that's the desire of planning commission and council, is to allow those type of uses outright permitted without a building, I think the code needs to reflect that and be changed to state that. Which is fine, I don't really care either way.
Just have to make a note of it, so when we start going through
Right.
code, we don't miss
Exactly.
that.
Yeah.
And when considering the permitted outright uses in a C1 zone district, which has pretty prescriptive design regulations,
Mhm.
you think, well, yeah, it makes sense that the code would say you have to have a building because we're trying to create these pedestrian elements with all these Cascadian styles with colors and materials, X, Y, Z. So it would make sense. But again, typically you wouldn't see a building with a parking lot. But that's why it would be in front of you to make those recommendations and conditions that you guys see fit that would meet the intent of the code.
I mean, if you look at all the diagrams within 1790, is what we're really talking about here. All the diagrams have buildings in them, I believe. And all the diagrams show parking areas and display areas to the sides or behind buildings.
Mhm.
So if you use that as kind of a tool of what we're looking to accomplish within the Sandy style, I think you'd be very hard pressed to say we're wanting lots without buildings, when you look at all the diagrams and all the schematics and illustrations within Sandy style. So I think it's totally fine on this particular proposal to interpret it that way. I don't think before you tonight is really a code interpretation. David could
Yeah.
correct me on that, but we didn't notice it as such or anything. So I don't think if you make an interpretation tonight, it is really, it's not really changing the code per se, like a typical code interpretation, but
Yeah, that would be true. I mean, that would be,
Yeah.
you're free to interpret the code tonight. I don't want, that's part of any application where you have a standard that maybe someone says, I think it reads this way, or I think it reads that way. What Kelly's getting at is there is a process in your code where someone can say, I would like, and when you did it with the,
Windows, right?
well, no, I was thinking of the more recent example of,
The one that Tracy brought.
yeah, what application was it?
I don't even remember.
It had to do with
Trees.
trees and
Trees.
subdivisions, right?
Oh.
So that one you made, it was applied for, and now, that carries over.
Mhm.
It's sort of like in a way, you're officially sort of interpreting your code. That wouldn't be true in this case, because there wasn't something applied for, but it's a sort of a splitting hair. But the point being is that if you have criteria that come up in the context of an application, that's something that you can look at and say, well, we would interpret it this way or that way.
But kind of back to the use. This use and the special variance kind of go hand in hand. If you guys are supportive of the use and supportive of alternative interpretation B, then the variance would make sense with the use. So that's why I came up with that alternative, had it ran by our attorney, presented it to you guys tonight. Because I do agree, typically some of these don't have those uses, or buildings associated with the use. But we do have 1790, but they have included additional elements such as the knee wall and the landscaping. So again, don't envy you guys. But that was kind of my, I guess, super short reaction to the alternative and everything needing a building. Regarding the lighting, when I read this, it says should be illuminated at and provides a range. However, I do think that needs to be looked at a little bit more because I don't see that justification. So we might want to do interpretation of that. But the way I interpret it currently, it provides a range and says should be eliminated at that range. So it's a bit unique. This is not a parking lot, so it is not illuminating a parking lot, but it does get back to public safety as identified here in section H to promote business vitality, public safety, and aesthetics through effective outdoor lighting. Health, safety, welfare is what a planner looks at first and foremost, so that's why that was included. And that goes in with the tree picking as well, just because there could be fruit falling from a tree onto a bystander on the sidewalk, which is why we suggested that. There is an approved list, and that is on the approved list. That is just a recommendation. You guys can go against that. That was the reasoning for that recommendation. Mr. Brown is correct that we have been suggesting using other trees because cedars, there's a beetle going. I'm not Emily, so I don't know all about the trees, but there's a beetle who's eating cedars apparently. So we are suggesting to developers not use cedars. So that is something that we have suggested in other projects as well. And that's also benefits
Yeah,
them.
it's maple.
Ash.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maple and ash. I'm not Emily. My apologies. Maple and ash because of a beetle eating. So we are suggesting those. That also helps because then they have to replace them. So.
What's the species of tree that's already there on the street trees?
There isn't any.
There's none.
I don't know, I'm looking at them, looking
Yeah.
at the photo, there's
I think
two of them.
there are a couple trees along Proctor.
Those are Chanticleer pears, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was just saying, consistent with every, we currently.
I mean, I
got
love the
every-
Chanticleer pears. They're great looking. I think they were a great pick. The only problem we're having with them is they shoot up a lot of suckers, and a lot of people aren't maintaining them, so the city's having to go through. But this would only be a few more, so I'm fine with saying Chanticleer pear as mentioned by Tracy. That's fine with me. They're beautiful when they blossom and everything. A few things I want to bring up. To me, the whole display versus storage thing that Tracy first mentioned, I think it's a pretty good idea, and I thought it was very interesting, his interpretation on that. I mean, to me, it's kind of, I don't know, to me, it's kind of splitting hairs a little bit in the sense of, I think when it's talking about exterior storage of merchandise or materials, I mean, maybe that was the intent for not to include display items. I'm not too sure, but I never even thought to read it that way. So I don't know. That's a good point though, and it's something you guys could think about. The thing B on page 2, I think we already went through that pretty well. I think staff really, with how the code's written, doesn't really have any other way to interpret that for the time being. I think it would be a good thing to change though in the code and make it clear which one of these permitted uses need a building and which of them can just stand alone without a building. So I think that's a code change is what's needed there. The dark sky, I agree with James that whether it was meant to say 1.5 to 2, it is a range typically when you have a dash like that. It's not saying 1.5 or 2 or greater. It doesn't say at a minimum. It is kind of, I think James and I talked about this before. If it's over 2 and you guys approve that, that's fine with us. As long as the foot candles don't exceed the requirement off site, which I think they already showed they do not. But it does present itself as a range, so I don't know how staff would really interpret that.
I think that that's a pretty tight range. Half a
It
foot
is,
candle
yeah.
is not much, so to have
Yeah.
that consistency across the whole site, I think it's intended to be a range, just because it's so
Starting
tight.
range is what you mean.
But
Yeah, I mean, I would say that there, Tracy's probably correct that there isn't technically walkways, but I don't know what else you would call the areas where where people walk between the RVs to get to the RVs. It is kind of walkways in a sense. They're not delineated, but that is pretty much what most of that area is. It's either display of a RV or it's a walkway, essentially.
Is that number that's in there, is that a maximum or minimum?
It doesn't say.
Well, what's the code supposed to be telling us? What's the intent here?
Well, I think it's
It's
just
just
trying to
a
tell us
term.
what the lighting should be.
Yeah.
But that's what I'm saying, is it's not very clear if it's a minimum, maximum. Tracy brought up a good point, says should. So is it something we're even really regulating?
So that, is that his point? I mean, they're saying this is what they want exactly, so
I don't
you're
know.
out there saying,
Well,
you know.
You know,
Tracy has to.
At the risk of getting, really down in the weeds here, I think this section's sort of interesting because it almost has two competing goals. At the top, it talks about it having compliance with the dark sky ordinance, which, if I understand dark sky ordinances, the idea is to not have, light pollution.
Right.
So that would suggest something, if not a lower foot candle, certainly where it's covered and you're trying to get all the light down. But then, number 3 talks about being adequate for safety purposes. And presumably, safety depends upon more light, not less. So,
I think that's why there's a range though, right? I mean, you're trying to do both. You're trying to have it light enough to be safe and dark enough to not mess up migrating birds or anything else.
right, and what that is,
Well, I'm familiar with illumination design on my day job, and I think that is a super tight range, and it's also not real bright. So I think.
It's not what?
Not real bright, really bright. So I think the intent is it needs to be 1.5 to 2 feet minimum for safety, which doesn't come close to violating any dark sky ordinance. That's how I read that.
So they're congruent. They can both exist.
I think so, yeah.
When I'm thinking about well, I guess this isn't time for our discussion. I'll wait.
Yeah, I was going to bring up a couple more things if you want me to go through them. They do say in the dark sky, this is regarding kelvins. Tracy's correct in that the code doesn't specify 3,000 kelvins. This is kind of one of the things that you guys have just been talking about. When you're using common sense, best practices, all we're trying to do is use best practices. It's not officially adopted in the code. We've actually had nobody push back against it, and everybody's complied that we know of. In the dark sky ordinance, it does actually say that you should be up to date with the most recent Illuminating Engineers Society of North America Lighting Handbook. And we have looked in there, and if you go in that handbook, they are suggesting that you don't exceed 3,000 kelvins. So while the code might not be 100% clear on whether 3,000 kelvins has to be followed or not, we are trying to follow the IES lighting handbook and just kind of using common sense of trying to keep them lower so it doesn't impact migrating birds and different things like that. So that's kind of the justification behind that. What we want to do in the future is actually just adopt the model dark sky ordinance that's produced nationally and get rid of our own personal one.
Yeah, well, just might work, I'm just thinking of this from a communication standpoint. If in that condition, if you just added a bit as per where you got it,
Yeah.
then it's clear to the person who read it that you didn't make it up.
Right.
And that there's some basis behind it, and they still argue with it, but, Tracy's comment was you were inventing code, so just a few more words of the condition might have
Right.
just provided more.
So the landscape buffer, without actually seeing the construction plans, I kind of understand what was being talked about, but all we were trying to do there is trying to basically make it as nice as possible for that residential house to the north. It is a conditional use permit, so I think, as part of the conditional use permit, you're supposed to look at how it's affecting the existing neighbors and neighborhood. And I think it would be good to either have a condition as James has recommended, or modify that condition to say the applicant and city staff can work together to try to put as much landscaping as possible after we kind of see what's on the ground there. We're just trying to make it a better buffer for those residences as well. I know this came up at the Dutch Brothers hearing, and that house to the north, they came and spoke, and then also all county surveyors came and spoke, and they all wanted more buffering, so you guys had required that, and Dutch Brothers was amenable to that. So that's all we're trying to do here, really. Just kind of create a better environment for those people. And then, as I said, the straight trees we're fine with putting in Chanticleer pear as the recommend, or the, in the condition, essentially.
Okay.
I have a question. It's probably a question for staff, I think. Is there a downtown plan or some document that informs where pedestrian crossings are, curb extensions, what frontage improvements look like?
We're doing that right now. It's a walkability assessment that we've been putting together. And we've been on it for a while, and then the intern took another job after her internship was over. And we just had an intern start today to work on wrapping up the walkability assessment and the Pleasant Street master plan. And those two documents will do exactly what you're talking about.
Okay.
Because, yeah, right now there's like a general idea of what things should look like, but this actually went to each block and identified issues on each
Right.
block face, both like sidewalk and curb related, and then also like utility poles that were in the way and hydrants that need to be removed, or moved.
Because I don't agree with the recommendation on the single ADA ramp. I think that's pretty short-sighted, especially in the downtown core. ODOT says they want only the east-west ADA ramp, but not the north-south, and they cite ORS 820, whatever it is, that says if one's marked, then that's the only lawful crossing. And I know they use that a lot, so I've seen that before. But in this case, why not build finish the curb extension, build the ramp, and if they can't lawfully keep it open, put a temporary sign in the middle. Then when that southwest corner develops, then you have 4/4 instead of 3/4. But
Yeah, it's an
doing that
interesting.
just sort of ensures that it'll never get built.
I don't even think the sign they can really require,
Well, it's
because
sort
the
of-
city controls from the curb backwards.
Oh.
So I think if the city was to say, no, the applicant doesn't need to pin the sign, I don't think ODOT can really do anything. Because we have an agreement with them that we control curb back.
Oh, that's interesting.
Because, yeah, they want to put that, like, sidewalk ends sign,
Yeah.
but everybody knows it ends. I mean, if you put in those all around our downtown, we'd be cluttered with those everywhere.
Well, it's the crosswalk closed sign, which legally, if you have that sign, then it's not a legal crossing.
Right.
And they're saying to not have the sign, it's still not a legal crossing because the one on the east side of the intersection is marked. Which, if that's their interpretation, that's fine. I think they just kind of use that as a get-out-of-jail-free card, and then, I don't know. I'd prefer to see 2 ramps and kind of set that up
Okay.
for all 4 crossings.
We need to give Tracy the opportunity to rebut.
Tracy Brown. I guess there was a question about the food cart pod, and, I was the planning director during that time, and, I've never thought of that code as every use requiring a building. That's why we approved it that way. And that's why I approved the Civics Plaza across the street, and that's why I approved the parking lot down behind Autos. I think it is an interpretation. We're not asking for that this time, but I don't think the code is black and white saying a building for every use is required. It's more permissive than that, and just based on a full read of that section and the uses I mentioned. Again, I believe we still are only proposing outside display and not storage, and that chapter or section J1 should not apply to the section, or in the alternative interpretation could be applied. On the lighting, I really think, I've looked at this section a lot, and I've looked at a lot of online research as well, and the dark sky ordinance was adopted when I was with the city, and it's a very good ordinance, and it talks primarily about lighting needs to be downward facing, full cutoff, and it can't trespass onto adjacent properties. It doesn't talk about illumination levels on the property per se. And so I'm really thinking these numbers are guidelines of minimum lighting standards, not maximum, for safety reasons. You want to, because as I mentioned, If they are considered maximum, then you could have parking lots with zero lighting, and that doesn't make any sense. So these are really, I think, intended to be minimums. Whether they apply to our site or not, you know, I'm not gonna haggle over that. But our lighting plan does have lighting levels higher than that. And, you know, we're not trying to overlight at all, but we are very cognizant. And I think we probably went through 5 iterations of the lighting plan before we could say it complies with the dark sky ordinance. And we kept lowering the light pole, because the higher it is, the more it casts. So we kept lowering the pole to make sure we're not trespassing off the site. And that's the primary standard. You know, the use next to this, to the north, is an apartment, small apartment building. You know, we're wanting to keep that fence there and the landscaping. It's a pretty thick hedge, as I kind of show in the picture there. And it's kind of transcended both sides of the fence in some places. It's probably at least 4 feet thick, and generally kind of an impenetrable hedge. So whether we need additional landscaping or not along there, we'll let you decide. I mean, I originally thought maybe it made more sense to put a fence on top of the wall that we're proposing. So we're proposing, if you can kind of visualize it based on that picture, we're proposing a wall that'll be about halfway up that fence in the back corner, and then we'll come down to about 1 foot tall as you come toward the street. And so I was originally thinking, well, maybe there'd be a fence on that, but then you run into the problem with the height of that fence. Since you're already starting off 3.5 feet, the fence is going to be kind of weird. You know, it's either going to be straight across and probably too tall at one point once you get out to the street, or if you go with the wall, it's going to be a weird fence. So I kind of rejected that and thought, let's go with let's protect that hedge that's there and not compromise that. That was my final recommendation to the engineer. So I think with that, we hope you can approve this. Appreciate it.
Hey, thank you, Tracy. Okay, we will start our discussion, and you know the routine, Tracy. We'll keep the public hearing open for you guys. We don't have any competition in it, so.
All right, well, I'll start.
Sure. I was going to ask if somebody could summarize everything in one sentence.
Oh, yeah, right. Don't ask me to do that. I'm just going to start, with what I think is common sense. I've been involved, and I don't, in the whole process for the last 12 years about the Main Street idea, getting things more pedestrian friendly and Sandy style. And I know that there's been a lot of pushbacks about those things because they're expensive, you know. But what the city has done is it has adopted those things. It's spent a lot of time. There's been a lot of community meetings, and they've adopted a code that's in favor of, and that's the code we oversee, the Sandy style and the walkability. And I'm concerned, and this is a huge ask to go from 10% to 100%. And it's in our downtown core. This isn't Johnson RV or suburban, which are in totally unpedestrian areas. You know, our downtown core is filling in, and it's becoming more vibrant, and we're getting people down there walking around. And even the food carts, I mean, that brings people downtown walking around. And I'm really concerned about making an exception for 100% storage. And I think it's a combination of display and storage. But either way, we just did the feed store, and we told them they couldn't put things all over their parking lot. So I think this is going in the wrong direction for where the city's trying to go. And And then I also have concerns about the lighting, just because you want it to be congruent throughout the downtown core. And if everybody else has lower lights, and then all of a sudden you have a parking lot with really bright lights, that, there's a place for that, and I think it's outside of the downtown core. So, and even if that weren't, well, so those are my initial thoughts. I just think that we've worked really long and hard to do Sandy style and to come up with this set of codes to look at. And the parking lot behind Otto's, that's a red herring. It's the city's parking lot, and it's down below. It's a parking lot. I don't know. Those are my thoughts. I don't think that, in other words, I think that as a planning commission, we try really hard to work with businesses, and we care about Funtime RV and, longtime people in the community. But I don't think that we should be going against our own code changing it from 10% to 100% for that kind of accommodation when the city is moving in a different direction. So those are my thoughts.
Okay, thank you.
I want to ask David maybe one question, and because we, and the applicant maybe kind of the same thing. Right now, there's a lot of product display that's in front of the building. One of the issues here was we wanted buildings within 10 feet.
Right.
Okay, of
Right.
that. Okay, now this is a legacy building for Suburban Chevrolet, so that is what it is, and, that was built at a different time. But, to me, if we did approve it, and if there's there, I personally would like to see no product display, or very little, in front of the building. Well, you see the building. I mean, that's kind of what we kind of want to see. To me, it's almost like a moving of the display a little bit as opposed to something new. If I take everything they currently have that's kind of in front of the building, if I just pick it all up and I put it over along the street side of the lot, it's kind of like just moving stuff over. It's already there. And you don't see the building. I'd much rather see the building, so you have that. I mean, I get much more Sandy style feel out of that. But, and I mean, so to me, I'd like to maybe condition that, but I don't know if I can that or not, because what I'm trying to say is we're treating this as one and this is a separate tax law. You follow me?
I think
But to me, that's where I looked at it, for at least one part, as just more of a moving of what was currently there. And by moving it, we actually got to see the building, and then you can make it look actually better by that, collectively as the whole property. But
So, yeah, I think it's complicated by the fact that, as James talked about, there was option A and option B in terms of looking at the site discretely or
Right.
looking at the site in total. So I have some discomfort with the planning commission going and taking from what is technically another site, albeit owned by the same folks, same business, I get all that. But simply because the applicant in this case, like any other applicant can, shows I want you to be looking at this site. This is what I'd want. So I think it becomes difficult to make conditions on a site that's technically not part of the application. I guess that's really what it comes down to.
Another reason I just kind of say that is I agree with prior comments, but I don't think it's up to the planning commission to tell people what they can do with their land, how to develop their land, to say you own this land and you can't do anything on this unless you build a building. I mean, what's going to get built on that? Who's going to come in and put in an office building or a building when you got all kinds of office space in Sandy that's vacant at this point? And I think we had a little bit of that same discussion on the Dutch Brothers. I mean, what do you want to have? You want to have, you want to give them, a variance. So we had the whole issue of the 30% there too, right? So we say, well, what's better, that well-developed as we saw it, or a fence that's been there forever? I mean, what's better, a vacant lot or something that's being productive and causing economic growth to Sandy. I personally don't see anybody coming in and building an office building here, which is what the code, if you like, wants. I mean, forget Sandy style for the moment. It's, then when the code says 50%, 10 feet, that's what, that's what it's looking for, see? And that's why C2 is different from C1, in a way. So I'm kind of a little bit careful in terms of saying, okay, you can't develop that unless you put that on there, particularly given the whole situation. But I can warm to the idea quite a bit if collectively, if I look at it, it's just moving what's currently on the street a little bit over there, and everything looks a whole lot better. You have all the landscaping, you got the fence, you got, because what else is gonna go there?
Mixed use.
My 2 cents, or sorry. Did I cut you off?
Nope.
I'm going to talk about what I think is common sense. And common sense is, there is a building. It's the Funtime RV building. It's sitting there. Because saying that, excuse me, I've got a little froggy throat tonight. Saying that somebody's going to come in the display area and purchase an RV and do all the paperwork on that site, okay, and not go across on it, isn't common sense to me, to have that business separated. So if you're asking me to just look at the corner, then it's like a no. But common sense is, I'd like to see, you're a great employer, good business in town, I'd like to see it used. Why not take the landscaping and bring it down to the next lot? And like Jerry said, open the front a little bit of the existing building. I think the reason we're skating around this is it's just all the encumbrance of Sandy style on the existing building if it were to come into it. So I'm looking for a little common sense on it. Is I love what's being proposed on the corner with the landscaping, et cetera. It's a great use of the property. But I think that's what we're kind of dancing around here, is by bringing it in as a part of the whole complex, it's going to be too onerous of what's going to have to be done on the site. And then you go across so my other point is, you go over to the food carts and you can have, we have temporary carports for cars that are there and no regulations going on. This would be a vast improvement as opposed to what's across the street. So I can get behind it on that side of it. But I think common sense is, there is a building. It's the Funtime RV building that's there. So, anyway.
The only last thing I would say is the use of the site for what's being proposed does not preclude the site becoming a building at some point in time in the future. If a businessman looks at this and says, I can make more money with a building here than stacking RVs, they're gonna do it. Okay, so you just take all the RVs off and you're right back building a building. So it doesn't preclude putting a building there. And I'd much rather see it developed as it is and be complementary to what's there in the meantime, as opposed to another vacant lot, which I suppose then we gotta require a fence around it like we had in this one, right? Or landscape it,
But
right?
what we're doing right now is we're just looking, is that right? We're just looking at this
Yep.
lot
That's
as
all
it
we-
is.
that's all we
That's
can
all we
look
can
at.
look at.
That's
And-
what's been applied for.
Right, and if it was that, if that lot was anywhere else in the downtown core, we wouldn't be letting them pave it over and fill it with RVs without a building. We
Right.
wouldn't let them do that.
That's right, but there
Like
is a
if it
building
was,
there.
if it was, but it's a different tax lot, so our,
I
and
agree
just
with
look
Ron on the
over
common
at
sense
this
part.
area Lila Leathers on Scales and between Pioneer and Proctor, those lots are empty.
I'm just coming back to the common sense again. There is a building that's there. We should buffer as much as possible with the residential to the north. I'm not worried about the lighting myself on it. I think they'll take care of that. But again, I don't know because I'm not the applicant, but I think the reason it isn't there is that the requirements of the Sandy style, if they were to apply for it, are too onerous to make it work for them.
But
So-
isn't the
Well,
sandy
the
style,
to the existing building.
Yeah.
but the sandy style, that whole ruling is what we're supposed to oversee, right? The sandy style is what we're working under. And when somebody makes improvements to their property, having to improve the building with sandy style features, that's how it reads right now, right? I
Well,
mean, I understand
but
what
I'm
you're
just
saying,
going,
that
I'm
it's
just going
hard.
across the street to the food carts that are there supposedly sandy style, and you have pop-up tents.
There's no sandy
Or there's no
style
sandy
food cart.
style, okay? So here's a businessman that's trying to make it look nice and come in and do it. I'm just trying to find some middle ground that's
I'm
there
with
on
Ron.
it.
I mean, I'm with
So.
Ron, you know, in terms of that. And I'm just assuming, and
Yeah.
then the applicant doesn't need to nod or do anything. I'm just assuming the reason that they didn't apply for this altogether is that would require sandy style improvements to the main Chevrolet building.
No, it
And they
would-
probably
it
got a
wouldn't.
number on that maybe or something, but I
It would-
can't
it
think of any
wouldn't
reason why they wouldn't.
You-
have
Did
just
you say
up
it
a-
wouldn't?
It would not do that.
Well,
Okay.
then
So
why
what it
wouldn't
would,
you
what it
just-
would do is make them have to do parking lot or display area and landscaping upgrades to the rest of the site.
Well,
The
I
only
think
time you
that-
have to do building improvements is when you touch the building.
Yeah, well, it's got some pretty good landscaping kind of as it is, in a way. Like I said, my biggest thing is if I'm just translocating a lot of that, the storage is currently fronting 26, and I'm just putting it over on the lot, and so now I can see the building.
But there'll be more storage there. You're not gonna see how are you gonna see the more building?
Also, you see the building if they don't have a big 45-foot park in front of mobile home
Why
right in
would-
front of
why
it.
wouldn't they
You know
do
what I'm saying?
both? Why wouldn't
Yeah, that's
they-
what the deal is, so,
We can't rent
you're parking that over on the lot on the end is my point, and I'm assuming stuff facing in, you know, out to the product display, et cetera. And so then in the front of the property, you can see the front of the property, which tends to get to the whole idea of being within 10 feet of the road, at least by spirit, anyway. But let the left side of the room talk first.
Well, the landscaping will certainly look a lot better on, if this new parcel is approved. And you can see it, if you look at the street view. With the other RVs right up against the road, I think that in our heads, that's what we're looking at. That's what's going to happen to this piece of property.
That's true.
And it's really just going to stick out, but as Tracy said, is it is separated back, and that fence is a decent bit back to protect the landscaping from the vehicles, so it will eventually, once all the trees grow up, it will be a little bit of a buffer from what we currently see. What you currently see, yeah, I don't think anybody thinks that that's a great Sandy style move. But it does look better than the tents that are at the
But the
food
set-
carts.
Yeah, the setback at Suburban is even more than what we're talking about here. And
Yeah.
that's what you're looking at is the vehicle.
No, it's not, the setback on Suburban is the property starts there. That's how far the highway owns
Oh.
on the right of way. Their
Oh.
property is quite a bit back
Oh.
on it, so,
Okay, so that much space doesn't
They
change
couldn't,
the
they
feel
couldn't
though.
move into it.
I got it.
yeah.
Well, I think my hang-up a little bit is everything's labeled accessory. So, the outdoor storage, even at 10%, is an accessory use permitted outright in 42, or 174210C. So, I don't see if all we can consider is the site and not the building, then I don't know what it's accessory to. When you jump to a minor conditional use in 4220, it never says accessory, but then 1790 says accessory. So considering the site all alone, I think it's hard to call it accessory. I'm not sure. I'm having a hard time getting an interpretation that gets you to a primary use, and where the code says that's okay as a primary use. Which is kind of gets to Ron's point, but if there were more to the application, there'd be something primary, but just for that vacant site, that's what I've been struggling with a little bit.
I'm trying to, I guess I'd have more of a procedural question for either David or James or Kelly, any of you guys. somebody comes in with an application and says, we fall under this particular use or whatever, and everything is based on that. It comes to us, and we say, no, it doesn't fit there, it fits elsewhere. Can we make that switch? Or do we have to act on how it is presented to us?
So for a specific site, someone comes in and applies for use X,
Mm-hmm.
and the planning commission says, we would essentially deny use X, but we think you fall under use Y. And so your question is,
Yeah,
could we approve
'cause
use Y?
That's kind of what Tracy did on this one, on the first one, in saying that where we landed on the 110J, says, well, it doesn't apply to us, we land over here. And my question is, can we even make that switch? But what you explained makes sense, that we would say, oh, let's assume that we agree and say, yeah, you're right, you don't fit there, but we see you fitting over here, and therefore we're gonna make our decisions based on that. Is that allowable?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
it is, because at the end of the day, you're still just interpreting what the code says relative to a specific application on a specific site.
Yeah, and it may not be the specific code that was raised by the applicant in the process.
Right. And I just offer one thing on the storage issue. I think it's a very, clever, and I mean that in a good way. Like, I think it's a very good read of that section. There is an or, and one section uses just storage, the other one uses display or storage. What I would look at is, under 1790J, that section is really trying to get at sort of stuff that's outside, and trying to either limit stuff that's outside, or if it has to be outside, screen it somehow. I mean, if you look through J, that's really what it's getting at. So the only thing I would say is that I think in some instances that distinction between display and storage may be viable, but I think for it, in this context, to really have meaning, it would have to be something that you could bring inside. Because otherwise, if it's displayed outdoors and stays outdoors, you're kind of also storing it outdoors, right? You're essentially doing both.
Yeah.
That's the way I would think about, in response to Tracy's take on it. And I think there are just certain things, I think, like RVs, that big things maybe, things that you may very well be displaying them. I think you are. There's no doubt that that's part of what the use would be, but I think you're also storing them, That's my thought on it.
I don't know if that cleared it up for us, but it's understandable, that's for sure.
I mean, but that doesn't change, so that's the the alternative to the alternative. I still think, from my perspective, that initial alternative interpretation that we started with, as I said at the beginning of the meeting, is a defensible interpretation.
Yeah, and the alternative and the Tracy's alternative
Right.
get us to the same place, don't they?
Yeah, they do. They do. At least in this case, they do, yes.
Right.
I mean, I think it's a really good point too, because we wouldn't regulate the removal of a particular RV ever. I mean, I understand the business, and I don't understand the business that greatly, I'm not gonna say that. But I understand the business enough to know that an RV probably won't sit there for multiple years, because I know they like to get new inventory and push out the old stuff. But if it did stay there for, say, 10 years, one RV, we wouldn't have any regulatory ability to say, well, now you're storing it there. You know what I mean? So I do think that's a really good, valid point. Although it'd be obsolete at that point, I do understand that.
Get a hell of a deal on it.
Yeah, exactly.
Let me ask the planning commission this, in follow-up to what I just asked David or clarified. with the two alternatives, so to speak, on the table, one that was presented by staff, one that Tracy presented, do you want to pursue one or the other? Because as I was trying to get direction on, it's kind of pointless to pursue them both, because we'll waste energy on one of them. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Doesn't the interpretation of the Exhibit M give you pretty much the same thing? Did we just decide that it's the same thing as what Tracy's proposing?
It will get us the same
Get us
place.
the same place.
Just in addressing a different section of code.
Got it.
Well, just being clerical for a second, you know, they've applied for a type 3 special variance and a conditional use, of which staff has recommended both of them be denied. So don't we have to act on those, because that's what's in front of us?
I think so.
No, the alternative that James gave you is from David. And that's the alternative that if you are gonna recommend approval, we would prefer you go with what our city attorney is recommending as the alternative and not an applicant.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
That's what I would, yeah, that's what
That's
staff's
up
recommending.
to you, yeah, certainly. But I also think that whichever alternative is what allows you to get ultimately to the conditional use, right? Because if you found that 110J is not satisfied, then I don't know how you get to approving the site overall. I mean, to me, that piece is the one that, for lack of a better word, sort of makes it or breaks it.
I'm in favor of the alternative option on Exhibit M, because, yeah, a recreational vehicle sales is a permitted outright use in C1. And I don't know how you would do that with 10% or less outside of a building. So, in my mind, the intent there is to allow that use in that zone. And I think that alternative reading in Exhibit M gets us there for the conditional use.
I thought
I
it was
agree
same.
with- I agree with
thought
that.
the same thing, that if you only had 10% to display anything, whether it's Suburban, Chevrolet, or anything,
Yeah,
you're
that's-
running small inventory.
And what makes this difficult is it's a standalone piece again. You know, we're going back to,
Yeah.
they made the choice to use this as a standalone piece and not incorporate everything else in. And that's where it makes it really difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or I think I mentioned this last time, I think it would have been possible to do a lot line adjustment to somehow bring it all in. They could, would that have,
They could do that, and then,
Yeah.
again, we would
then
have to
it
look at
triggered the whole
site,
thing,
yeah.
right, so, it's understandable.
So when I'm looking at this aerial view and we're looking down at it, you know, what the current rules are and the Sandy style and everything, the idea of having the buildings up to 10 feet near the pedestrian walkway it's what makes the whole downtown core like congruent, and you're all walking along here and stuff. So what we're in essence saying if we do this is that we're not gonna expect that out of this tax lot at all.
Right. and
Why not have some? Well, so with Dutch Brothers, they had to move the building closer. They had to build an awning. They had to, you know what I mean? Like one thing you said, Dawn, was that we're gonna be able to see the existing building better.
Maybe,
Well,
but we
if
can't do
maybe-
anything.
Well, that'd be what I'd like to
Right.
see, but that's an off-site thing. and-
That's an off-site thing.
And,
Yeah.
but if you move the product display that's in front of the building over to that, I think collectively, that enhances the whole frontage there, but. The point I think that they made, and I'm sensitive to, is to think that any development in C1 has to have a building based on the permitted use just doesn't make sense. And we have examples within C1 where we have a development, like the food carts, that don't have a building. So I don't think we have to assume that if you have a building, yeah, you want it within 10 feet. The original assumption is that you have a building, all right, and that a building is required. And that's why, what I said, and I'd be kind of careful I use the term sandy stuff, because a lot of people like to throw that against us. There is all kinds of code that has to do with just how we want things to look, than anything to do with sandy style. They were there before we invented sandy style 10 years ago. So, but the fact is, if you had a building, yeah, that's what you want. But to say that you have to put a building there, is also, you're also now telling the applicant what you can do and can't do with your property. And given what they want to do, and since it's, like you said, a permitted use in C1, which is RV, how in the heck do you display RVs at less than 10%?
Not to be a contrarian, but I will be just for a second. When you look at your use section, that is kind of what it's doing, though, is limiting the ability for a property owner to do specific things on their property. So we already do that
Yeah.
with zoning
True.
codes.
That's what we do. Yeah.
Right.
It's like in the C1, for example, we don't allow residential outright permitted. It has to be connected to a commercial building, or you would have to grant a conditional use permit. We don't allow things like manufacturing plants or any heavy industrial. So we already do actually do that. It's not the same as what we're looking at tonight, but we do limit uses, and
Yeah.
we do tell people to a certain degree what they can do with their property.
Yeah, but and I agree with what you're saying, but the use that's being in front of us is outright permitted use there. So I'm
So
looking
a
at
limit.
it as, I'm
So a
also
limit.
looking at it with a common sense. This goes to council, I know what's gonna happen, so I think we need to make it work, and that's gonna save everybody a lot of money and time and energy.
I would go back again just in terms of common sense and trying to be, I think, great business here in town, but just being a good steward of, it would be great if the applicant could take the landscaping that's on the
Proposed.
the proposed landscaping and extend it another 70 feet down, okay, and tie it together. That would be awesome, I think, and I'd be all behind it. It'd be,
Yeah.
even though it's off,
Yeah.
it's not part of it,
It's offsite.
Yeah.
but that would tie that whole piece together around there. But
Well, and you know what you said, and I know we can't do a second thing, but if that were to happen, and then they did something like what Dutch Brothers did and built something coming out from the existing building, like a covered area where people could mull about and talk, then you would be coming towards the street, and it would preclude other vehicles
But,
from the
again,
front of
we
the
can- we
building.
can-
I know
we
we
can't
can't
talk
talk
We
about
can talk about that till the cows come
I
home,
know.
Point is, there's no building to
Yeah.
extend
Can-
from.
but,
can-
yeah, Tracy,
We have a
go
hand.
ahead.
We have a
We're
hand.
still open.
wanted to, so I was just asking Jerry, because I know he spent quite a bit of money on the building, and I asked him how much. He said he spent about $225,000 on the building fairly recently. I mean, you're kind of, I mean, I understand what you're saying. It's, you're putting money into a building that doesn't comply. But certainly it's better than it was before. I did ask him about, the displaying RVs in front of the building, and he doesn't have a problem with moving those. I mean, the reason he's kind of stacked it the way is because he doesn't have enough room to display, and that's why he's making the request. In terms of the landscaping, I don't know. I mean, it would be nice. I think, he spent $250,000 on the building. He's probably gonna, I don't know how much this parking lot's gonna be. It's several $100,000, because there's a huge underground storage tank. Maybe when he gets flushed with that, I mean, what I've found that happens, and I can't say this will happen, I'm not gonna lie and say, oh yeah, he's gonna upgrade the whole site after this, but I found that what often happens as time goes on and, and they start making more money with their business, people want it to look nice. You're in a business of, a luxury business, and you want people to feel comfortable and nice. And that's why these dealerships have great showrooms. You go in there and it's like, they're wonderful. That's why they do that. It's to wine and dine the customer. But, so I don't know, over time, as he kind of improves this site and spends that money and starts to recoup that in the sales, hopefully the up sales, maybe over time you can improve that frontage. As I said, we can't guarantee it, but.
And we can't
No,
ask you to get
We
it.
can't, yeah, we can't even consider it.
I think we need to bring it to a conclusion. Like, I think we kind of have a consensus. I'm just looking, Jerry, for how we,
Yeah, I
what's the way to
think,
do it? What's the motion look like, David?
I'm getting, without
Why-
doing a straw vote or straw poll, which
So one thing I would like to,
Tell
so the
them
applicant
sure
raised a
consensus.
number of potential issues.
Mhm.
So I think outside of what you were just asking, David, is these other issues, I mean, you don't have to address them, you could just go with the conditions as presented by staff. But before we get to a motion, if we have other ideas or issues with what staff has proposed and what the applicant raised as concerns.
The conditions?
Yeah, I do think, I mean, if you're fine with the staff conditions, that's fine. If you want to look at modifying the 3 conditions that the applicant brought before you, I would say that at least we should address them.
I think we should
I
too.
mean, I was okay with the conditions. That, to be honest with you, I tend to rely on you folks. And usually the applicant is the siren blower when it comes to that, so tend to look at the ones they don't like.
Let's go through them.
Yeah, let's
Yeah,
go through
it's-
them.
Yeah, there's only 3 of them.
Yeah.
That's why, yeah.
where are they in the report?
They're in
Page
page
2,
50,
Bob.
roughly page 50.
Well, don't we just have to go over 1, 2,
Conditions.
3? No,
All of
the
them are
ones
just
that
the
they're
ones they
talking
brought up.
about? Oh, I see.
Oh, you're talking
Got it.
just the ones
Yeah.
that Tracy
Are we
raised?
talking
Yeah.
about the ones that
Lighting,
Tracy brought up?
buffer.
There's 3 of them.
Yeah.
There's,
Down at the bottom, page 2.
yeah, the lighting, the landscape buffer, and the
Just follow
trees.
Tracy's got it all blocked out really.
Yeah.
Okay,
I mean, you could address other ones if you have concerns with them, but
Yeah.
since staff presented them and the applicant doesn't have concerns,
Yeah, so
Well,
we
right.
could, as
I
staff
wouldn't go through them if I
says.
was you, but.
Yeah.
Okay,
Other
You can
than
knock
me.
yourself out and do it, I guess.
let me
Okay.
focus our
They're
attention
11,
on the bottom of
23, and
page
24.
2.
Okay.
The condition of lighting that says that updated photometric plan, not to exceed city limitations, cutoff not to exceed 3,000 Kelvin. We heard the explanation on the point of the Kelvin. I don't know, I can't remember if Tracy raised an actual issue that was contrary to what you proposed.
Just to assist you, if you look at, number 2, the bold text right above condition number 23 or the item 2,
Uh-huh.
that's what I was recommending or suggesting, but I'm just helping you on this.
Okay, thank you.
So,
Eliminate-
wait.
I'm okay with that.
Modify the plans.
At the bottom, we request the
Yeah.
planning commission modify these findings and conditions to approve the applicant's lighting plan to eliminate the 1.5 to 2.0 maximum lighting condition and the 3,000 Kelvin recommendation.
Uh-huh.
So I guess what I'm wondering is, I mean, the staff told us why they're doing that with the IES professional code. And the rest of the lighting downtown is expected to follow these. So why would we change it for this one? Why would we allow brighter, wider lights?
Well, I would answer that, part of it, it's kind of what you said about the 1.5 to 2 is weak lighting to start with. So setting, that may be weaker than reasonableness.
If I can clarify, you can have like lighting that exceeds 2-foot candles, but still meet 3,000 kelvins.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just want to
Uh-huh.
explain
Oh,
that that's a
okay.
possibility.
Are they
So we
redundant?
could
You
do
just
both.
pick one?
Yeah, they can.
No, because the foot candles are how much light, and the kelvins are the
How
light
bright it
brightness.
is, how bright it is.
We're fine with the 3,000 Kelvin. I mean,
Okay.
My main point was just had to do with, it's a standard that's not in the code.
Yeah.
That's the main point. But we're
Yes,
fine with that.
but
Okay.
but it kind of is one that you can live with.
That would win me over on that.
Okay, so consensus on that one, that to modify the findings?
So I'm just taking minutes here. So you'd be modifying the findings to allow the lighting to exceed 2, but the 3,000 kelvins would still apply.
Yes.
Yes.
How far exceed 2? So are we putting a limit or no limit?
I mean, what's the
I-
Well,
code?
the Kelvin is the limiter.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the
I mean,
guidance.
personally, I'm comfortable with just not putting a limit as long as
Okay.
they meet the off-site foot candle requirement, which they're doing,
Okay,
and the Kelvin.
okay.
Then I don't think it matters as much,
All right.
I
personally.
think if they
Thanks.
complied with the 3,000 kelvins, if they lit it up as bright as they could, it's gonna bleed over. I mean,
Okay,
that seems workable to me.
okay.
Okay, the next one is the north side buffer, and the applicant requests that the condition be removed. And the condition was that there be a 5-foot buffer, landscaping buffer, 5 foot in depth, to include evergreen plantings at a minimum of 6 feet tall, located the length of the north property, in order to create an additional buffer for the neighboring residential development to the north.
I'd like to see the walls gonna be 5 foot off. Why not fill it in with something to begin with, and it's gonna be higher than than it is now. So as much buffer as you can give to the residential side, I'm in favor of, but
I would
Now, the
agree.
wall won't be higher than what's here now.
I thought it was gonna be higher back.
The
over
wall
there.
is 3.5 feet back here.
That's a fence, right?
Yes, but the
But
wall
that's
that they're
gonna be a
gonna build is only 3.5 feet high back here.
You're right,
And
but,
half a foot high here.
right, but I'm saying it will be higher, then you'll be higher than the fences, it'll be even easier to look over. Back in the corner.
Okay,
That's, so as much as you can buffer that,
that area,
Well, he's saying it's already buffered by, I can't quite tell, there's a picture on the backside here. You know, it shows a pretty deep hedge there when you're at the street.
yeah.
Yeah, it does.
When you get back to the end of the property, it kind of gets less and less and less, so I kind of wonder is that fence rotten inside of there? Is there any?
I
is
got,
that
looks
really
like the
close?
hedges
I
between
mean, what do you
the
want
fence
there? You
and
want a
the
fence or do
garage.
you want a hedge?
You got both of them here.
Well, I'm sure the fence is functional. If you- Once they get behind this,
I
it's
also
gonna
wonder
rot.
if that's
The hedge is
about
probably
the
holding up
price
the
of it.
fence.
Yeah, I would say at this
Yeah,
point,
it
that's
is.
probably
It is.
true.
The point is, or the goal of the condition is to create a buffer to that building that we're looking at. So as I look at it, my question is what is there sufficient to create a buffer? Would we have asked for something if there was nothing there?
Nothing there.
Would be, if I interpret this right, this fence at the north end, west end, excuse me,
Northwest.
is a ground level. And they're gonna put a wall 3.5 feet,
Up from, yeah,
There.
that's what I got.
which reduces the distance from, I mean, and that's
The fence
asphalt
gets
fence,
shorter.
right?
The
right,
fence gets shorter.
Right, everything gets shortened. It seems to me like there needs to be a consistent height of the buffer there. Tracy said, yeah, you could put a fence down the top of the wall. They rejected that. That's the easiest way to do it. And if there's a grade difference, I mean, we did it, we built a fence. You go like this, then you go down like this, you go down like this. You know, you don't necessarily have to make it that way. I mean, there's ways to make fences look nice that are, you know, going downhill or uphill.
Okay.
Can I
So-
give one alternative too?
So,
Pardon?
Can I give
Yes.
an alternative?
Please.
You could also just condition it that the combination of existing landscaping, fence, retaining wall, and anything proposed has to maintain a screening of a certain height.
yeah, uniform screening of,
That way, if they do get in there and start ripping into things and the fence falls apart or, you know, whatever happens during the site excavation, I don't know, just a thought.
that's a good idea. I mean, one of the things is that we're gonna have high RVs parked right next to that. So in terms of you wanna maintain a level of, you want to maintain a level of screening for the residents next door.
And if you put a fence on top of the new wall, the RVs are just gonna back into it and I would imagine push it over.
They can drive well.
Yeah, yeah, go ahead, Tracy, we're still
Just like,
open.
Give them some credit.
I was just asking Jerry what that building is, and he said it was a garage.
Yeah,
So the main dwelling part of it is the two-story part to the north.
Okay.
Mhm.
And I guess the only other thing I would say is that, based on this picture, it probably doesn't meet the setback to the property line itself. It's probably closer than it should be, because it's very close to that fence.
Well, it was probably built, who
Mhm.
knows how long ago.
Oh,
Right.
you're talking about the property?
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
the single-story garage.
Yeah,
Oh, yes, yes.
yeah. Well, there's a lot of buildings that won't meet
Um,
today's codes.
Okay, so what we've been talking about just now is putting a fence on top of the wall that they are going to construct. We have not addressed the one issue of the buffering with trees between that wall and what we see here. Are we saying that the fence on the wall is sufficient for buffering without a landscape?
No, I think we need
Thing between.
landscaping. I think we still need landscaping.
Even in, as Tracy pointed out, it'd be in a ditch?
Oh, okay. Yeah, okay, yeah, I was thinking that was
So
on the
you're gonna
other
have
side.
you're gonna have two
Right.
things. You're gonna have
I
a
got
hedge
it.
and a fence, and you got this thing 5 feet away, and we're talking, my understanding is that you're talking about the vegetation between the two.
Yeah.
And
Isn't that what bioswales are?
Pardon?
Well,
Yeah,
so-
yeah, but they don't have trees in them
Yeah.
necessarily, so.
So the runoff from this is gonna go to the north, right?
yeah,
Towards
to
that building,
area.
and that's where the fence is gonna be. That's where that's where the
It's gonna
wall is
collect
gonna
it.
be?
Yeah, the wall's right there.
Yeah.
Sure ahead.
Yeah, it will all drain to the north, but there's a huge underground tank
Yeah.
under the
Okay.
parking lot that will
Got it.
collect everything. And then there's a pipe that will go out to the street on Beers. And then the nearest storm detention pipe is down at Beers and Pleasant. So he's gonna have to cut the street and put that pipe from the big underground storage tank.
Okay,
So
thank you for the
Yeah,
clarification.
and there is a curb on the back of, so the wall will come up, and then the paving will be 6 inches below that edge of the wall. So just in case any additional drainage will hit that curb on the
Mhm.
back,
Okay,
and it won't, go over the side of the wall.
okay, thanks.
Okay. The applicant requests that the condition be removed. We've talked, as I picked up, on a tweak to the existing condition. The condition is a landscape buffer. It doesn't talk about a fence or anything does not mention that retaining wall that goes from 3 feet to half a foot. What are your thoughts on,
Are you on the last one?
no, I'm on the landscape buffer.
23.
I'm just looking at the wording
second
of the condition. The
So-
condition is,
I don't, just for clarity, I don't think we realize, we're just looking at it again right now. I don't think we recall, I think we just missed that there's a retaining wall with a fence there. So I think we're fine with it just being that
Okay.
and not
Okay.
additional landscaping. I mean, not to say that that's what you guys should go with, but just so you know, I don't think we caught that.
so what you're saying is if you had to do it over again, that condition wouldn't be there,
I
probably?
don't know. I'm just saying, I
Well,
don't
if you're
think
saying you're comfortable with the wall.
we're comfortable, I think, with what the applicant is proposing. Just because I don't think we realized there was a retaining wall with a fence.
Uh-huh. Well,
I'm sorry, what was the last thing you said? You didn't realize there was
that a retaining wall being built there.
with a fence? Or just the
No,
retaining
just the
wall?
retaining wall.
I mean, we see it on the plans now.
Yeah.
I think we just missed it.
We
You
normally
didn't
think of a
receive a
retaining wall,
updated
you know, we
narrative
start at
explaining
6
the
feet
differences.
and go
Right.
up from there.
Right.
Yeah, so anyways.
But if staff is comfortable with removing it, any further discussion?
No.
Okay. Street trees. Now, this is a tough one, guys.
I don't know, I think we ought to go with the prickly pear. Instead of pear, what's wrong with prickly pear?
Anybody have a problem with
No.
changing the species?
No.
Okay.
Can I add one to the list?
A condition?
Yeah.
Sure.
I would propose modify condition
That's right.
7 to have ramps and curb extensions in both directions. And if they want, we could leave condition 5, which is to mark it as closed, the north-south crossing. But at least then, the ramps would be there, so once the south side, there's some improvements made, you could have 4 pedestrian crossings in the downtown core, which seems like what we ought to be doing. Does that
Okay.
make sense?
Yeah, yeah. So that is, if you're trying to get this in the notes, I'm assuming there's consensus on that one.
Yes.
That's easy.
I don't, nobody's throwing anything at me. That number 7 would be ADA ramps compliant on the, where's?
It does say ramps plural. You might take a little bit of restructuring, but you could say,
We got it, yeah.
You know what we want. right?
Yeah,
What we're
yeah.
thinking, you can wordsmith that, and then
I mean,
up on.
I think we'll have to wordsmith it in the fashion that if ODOT doesn't approve it and we find out they do have complete control of that, that it could remain as is.
Okay,
as long as that's not subject to
you have some
approval by
knowledge
ODOT.
for us.
No, I'm not clear what you're suggesting, Todd.
Oh, essentially it would mirror the northeast corner.
It'd
Or
be
there's-
it'd be a curb ramp, one going east and one going south.
So what you have,
Okay.
east-west direction is great, but it would essentially, it would have a
North-south.
ramp pointed towards the south and a curb extension
So
on the
they're not,
south.
it's not being proposed as a kind of a corner ramp that would serve both directions?
No, because that doesn't meet current
Okay.
ADA.
Yeah, those aren't allowed by ODOT anymore.
So one that's being proposed is just going across the highway, and you're saying going across Beers? I'm not still.
No, Beers is
That's
already
what it's just
proposed,
Beers right
and that's
now.
good. I would add.
South.
All right, all right.
Add another one going across the highway. Then if ODOT's not comfortable leaving it because of that ORS provision, they could still mark it as, sign it as closed, even though there's a ramp there. But then that allows in the future the ability to have all 4 crossings. So I'm afraid if we build it this way now, we'll forever
Well,
lose that opportunity.
Right now, the crosswalk is on the other side, from the
marked-
property,
The marked crosswalk.
the marked sidewalk.
Right.
And that's what we want people to use.
Right.
So by putting an ADA ramp going south off of that southeast corner, it seems like you're putting in another crosswalk just across from the one that's there.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And why do we want to do that? Explain that to me.
Because it makes it pedestrian-friendly downtown, so you don't have to go out of direction to cross the street. I mean, at a higher volume, higher speed, different character roadway, that might be appropriate, but in the downtown core,
Yeah.
I would,
Yeah, but-
I'd encourage
Pedestrian.
marked crossings of, yeah, 2 in the same.
Yeah, I guess it was down the walkability plan, but, it's Highway 26, and, on one side of it says, darn highway's clogging everything up. Well, the way you clog everything up is you move things. Well, the highway doesn't move, it's stopping every time for somebody walking across. So, seems to me like common sense says walkability, but there's some defined crosswalks on 26. You just can't walk across on every one, or we don't want people to do. And then at the same time, get all upset because traffic's flowing slow through Sandy.
Well, that's,
Mhm.
all of those intersections in downtown now are legal crosswalks.
Yeah, they are.
But
So,
With
the
or
point is,
without.
right now, we don't
They're
have a
just
marked
more
crosswalk there,
dangerous.
so.
right, and I'm not proposing we mark it now. I would just put a ramp there, so in the future, if that other corner has improvements.
There would be a
made.
ramp there, and then you would add the closed sign.
Or you could mark 2 crosswalks, but that's a future discussion.
I'm with Don on, we have it striped across. I understand that it's technically, you could use either one, but trying to usher somebody to what has the signage up and the hashes for a pedestrian crossing, I think.
It would still do that.
That would still do
Condition
that.
5 still has the closure, so you couldn't use it legally.
There would be no hash marks on 26.
No, I understand, but what I'm just saying is, with the ramp there, it implies to me that there is a crossing there.
Except there'll be a post and a closed sign.
Yeah.
Possibly.
And no ramp
Well,
on the
that's
other
what,
end.
that's what 5 is asking for.
Okay.
We would add that on number 5, right?
Yeah. What, add what to 5? Sorry.
The post on that south ramp that you're proposing.
Yeah, you could just leave 5 as is, and it says install the closure sign. Even though the ramp's there, doesn't preclude a sign. That's done.
Okay, the north side of the west leg.
Yeah.
But we're looking at the east leg, are we?
No, you're looking at the south.
Southeast corner.
North and south sides of the west leg. Yeah. Yep.
Oh, the west
Right
leg
here.
of Proctor.
Yeah.
Yes. Yep.
So the only thing we would request, I don't think we have a problem with doing that, but we don't want to catch 22, that it's a condition, and then we got to fight with ODOT
Yeah.
about it.
Kelly
So-
makes a fair
so if
point
you
too.
can
Yeah,
have
yeah,
it
we'll-
permitted by ODOT or something like that.
Yeah.
We'll pass it to David. He can write it really clear.
Sure.
Give us some wiggle room if ODOT says no and they have final authority or whatever.
Sure, yeah, I don't mean to box them into
No.
an unsolvable problem there.
Okay, so we have
If they
addressed,
get to choose.
Right.
we have addressed the conditions that the applicant had issues with. Now let's look at that interpretation.
Yeah, go ahead.
Are we,
I got 10 minutes.
and it can take a vote, but are we comfortable with the first alternative?
Can you stay?
That's,
M?
that is M.
Okay.
The bottom paragraph. However, another interpretation could be that the phrase "except as specifically authorized as a permitted accessory use" means not as code language specifically authorizes, but instead as the planning, as we, or planning commission specifically authorize in a given case. As written under that interpretation, we could specifically authorize outdoor storage in an amount that would exceed 10%.
Sure, that's what David wants it.
That's your interpretation, so.
Yeah, I'm okay with it.
Yeah, we don't listen to the attorney, we're wasting our money, so, because we listen to our attorney.
I mean,
I'm in favor of that. yeah.
Yes, agreed.
so
Yes.
which one? The one that was presented by David?
Yes,
Yes.
yes, that's the only one we're gonna,
But
So
instead,
is
as
that
the
exhibit
plan-
M? Sorry, I don't have.
yes, it's in Exhibit M, third paragraph. Is where we're,
So say that in really plain language, Jerry. What does that mean to you? Not in the legalese.
well, what the code says that it's except as specifically authorized. And the question is, who specifically can authorize it?
Who or what?
Well, yes, is it, as I was telling Kelly earlier, is it a body or a book?
Right.
Mm.
Is it, when we say unless except as specifically authorized, is it by a body?
It's passive voice, so you don't know who's on,
Or
what or
book.
who is on.
Got it.
Yes. So
Damn
we're
passive
saying,
voice.
we're saying in this case that the authorization comes to a body,
Okay.
and that is us. Again, it is another, little flaw in the code that gets us where we are today. So, is there anything else? We've got the conditional use, variance, design review. Any other issues before we go to motion? It sounds like the motion would be that we would be approving the application based on the findings and the conditions of approval with the specific, you got something to add for me?
Just the hearing.
Yes, that's
Close the
right.
hearing.
I
That was-
had
that
it
was
in my
Kelly.
mind, I knew it sometime. Let's go ahead and close it.
I move we close the public hearing.
Second.
Been moved
Who
and
seconded
seconded
it? Okay, thank you.
to close the public hearing at 9:01. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Hearing is closed. So carrying on, the motion would be that we would approve the file based on the findings of facts, the conditions of approval presented by staff in the staff report with our tweaking, our adjusting to those. And we need to make a statement on the interpretation.
You could just say the interpretation in Exhibit M as in Mark.
The alternate, because there's two interpretations given in M.
Good point. Good point. Yes, the
In the final paragraph.
alternative interpretation in Exhibit M.
Yes, and if you want to be more specific, in which the authorization is given to the planning commission. This is, David, this is when you say to somebody, say, all you have to do is
Say
say.
so moved.
I so move.
I was waiting for one of you to do it.
Nice job, Jerry.
Who's gonna second it?
Somebody second.
So who moved that? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I did.
You did?
That was
Okay.
Don.
Yeah, the way I get paid for tonight.
I'll second.
Okay, been moved and seconded to approve file 18030, Funtime RV, based on the conditions of approval, staff report with our adjustments, and the interpretation from Exhibit M. Roll call vote.
Okay, Commissioner Carlton,
Yes.
Commissioner Lasowski,
Yes.
Commissioner McKim Wenzel,
No?
Commissioner Logan,
Yes.
Commissioner Mobley,
Yes.
Chairman Crosby.
Yes. Motion carries. Okay. That is it. There is no new business, as I mentioned earlier. You have items for us.
Yeah, can you just give me 1 second here?
Yep.
Trying to keep up with the minutes here at the same time.
Mm-hmm. I'll tell you about that sometime.
Looks like it came from the highway.
It came out.
It was excruciating, I know, but
Yeah, because you can see, like you mentioned, you come down here to Suburban, see right there. You can see the property line in Suburban.
We can look at that after.
Congratulations.
That's right.
thank you.
Somebody screwed up.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Then what's this?
So I was just gonna mention a couple
This is not a
things.
tax lot.
I didn't have like a long
It's all
list,
in here.
and I want us to get out of here since it's not too late
Goes through
yet.
the bakery.
So in September, we're gonna have a meeting, and it's gonna be 2 quick items. I hope they're quick.
Used to be a road.
One's adoption of some of the FSH overlays that we basically approved with the annexations of properties. Now we're just officially going through DLCD and notifying them and actually doing the official adoption with our zoning map. So that should be fairly quick and easy. And then the other one is some slight tweaks or modifications to Chapter 1744, C2, to allow an additional use. Right now, we've been getting some interest in people doing mixed use with residential above commercial in our C2 district. And right now, they have to go through the PD process, which is very onerous, so we want to just make it a permitted outright use, like it is in C1. And then also increase a couple other standards like height, to allow higher height, and then to allow a slightly more display area without going through a conditional use process, which is funny, because that's kind
A
of.
higher height in which,
A higher percentage of outdoor display. It's not much higher, just a little higher. And then in October, I can't go into it too much obviously yet, but basically you'll be seeing a 100-lot subdivision for you, north of 211. So that will be coming for you probably at the October meeting. what is, I can't read
You
that
said
over.
north of 211?
Yeah. And without going into the details too much, because I don't want,
Right.
they have an attorney involved in it and everything else, that you've seen before, Mr. Robinson.
We've got an attorney too.
Yeah, we do. That's why I'm careful to say too much here. But that'll be the October 28th meeting. So that will be a fairly substantial thing, not only because it's 100 lots, but because the proposal could affect existing residents. So they will actually be holding a public outreach meeting. We suggested doing that, and they actually thought it was a good idea, on September 18th at 6 p.m. at the library. I don't know how planning commissioners probably shouldn't attend that. I want to bring it up.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
I don't know, I
touchy.
wanted David's input on that.
We attended, is that a problem?
A little bit, I.
Yeah.
Feel like
Yeah,
it's
you're
partake
getting an
contact.
ex parte contact.
Yeah.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
think
yeah,
clearly.
below that.
You're
So
here-
I-
you're
I'm
here
gonna
to
attend.
testify.
Otherwise, I was
Yeah.
feeling like I have to go.
I'll attend the meeting, so I'll kind of know what happens. I'm gonna be very just like, oh yeah, I'm here to answer any questions, but I'm not, because I think there's gonna be some very angry people there. So I'm definitely not going there to represent the applicant, I'll tell you that right now. I'm just going there, as a staff member to answer any
A
questions.
resource person, yeah.
But it could be an interesting meeting, depending on how many people come.
I think I'm gonna be on vacation. 28th of October.
And a lot of those people don't know I live that close to them, so.
Yeah.
And then the only other thing I really want to bring up is we do have a lot of applications in right now. A few of them, the applicants were really good in that they went above and beyond to make sure it was a type 2, because they just didn't want to kick it to a type 3. So they modified their proposals. Space Age that's happening with, another subdivision that James is working on. They originally had variances and deviations, and both of those applicants did a tremendous job to get the proposals to meet our code, which we're very appreciative of. So those most likely won't be coming before you unless another person in that area requests a hearing.
Does that mean they're afraid of us?
I don't know what that means. Yeah, take it for what you will. But then I did want to talk just for a
Costs money to
minute.
come in front of that.
In time.
I just want to talk for 1 minute about November and December. I'm going to try to give everybody a month off in there somewhere, and I'm also going to try to do like, I just wanted your guys' input on if you guys would like to meet early at one of those and do like a dinner. I know we've done that some years in the past. So maybe we could do like a 6 o'clock dinner with like a 7 o'clock meeting or something like that. I don't know if Don has some slideshows to run through or something, like he's done in the past.
All he's got now is pictures of his knee.
Yeah, I got some great
Yeah,
pictures
yeah.
of my knee. You
Don-
want to see a blown up ACL?
Don and Chris can have like a slideshow
Yeah,
of
the surgery
hospital
show.
surgeries.
Well,
Yeah.
let's put this- yeah, next year, after we spend 5 weeks in Africa, we'll
There
have-
you go.
But this year, we're staying close to home so we can afford next year.
There you go. So I was thinking about doing that either in November, December, with both of those meetings, and we can do this by email communication too, but November 25th is the week of Thanksgiving. So I think that might be hard. And December 23rd is 2 days before Christmas, so I probably won't be coming to that meeting regardless, so.
Yeah.
Well, so, I mean, do you want to crank those up to a different date?
That,
Yeah.
what I was gonna do is if you guys are up for this, what we'll probably do is tentatively set them,
A week earlier?
but I'll probably throw out some polls, those
Okay.
like Google polls.
Your doodle polls are great.
Doodle polls, yeah, and throw some alternative dates to everybody. My hope is that one of them, we don't even have to hold, like we get a
Yeah.
month off. And then the other one that we do hold, we'll do like a dinner and stuff, that sounds
Okay.
good to everybody.
Yeah.
So does
I
a
mean,
doodle
I won't-
poll work for?
Yeah.
Yeah, I won't be here the week prior to the Christmas,
Okay,
but prior to that I will, that's my elk hunting trip. I'll be
Okay.
gone.
Uh-huh.
Try to skip the December one.
Must be
that's what
nice
I'm
be
gonna try to do
retired.
that.
If you did November, would you go to the previous Tuesday or something?
I'm kind of thinking that, because I
Mhm.
don't, just having it on Thanksgiving week just makes it complicated.
Yeah,
No,
that's,
no.
that's
Yeah.
not, that's.
So yeah, I think we'd go to the Tuesday before that is probably my guess, the 19th, if we hold one. That's about all I had.
I had a question for you on the Kentucky Fried Chicken. When they did their remodel, they didn't meet, I was just wondering why they didn't have to do any sandy style. Is it just how much it costs type of deal?
Yeah, that's a great question. We got him to comply with the color palette, to remove that pyramid thing, to get rid of like the thematic architecture thing that is prohibited in Sandy South. That project's actually been going on since 2015, I believe.
Where is the KFC? I don't even
It's right in front of the
McDonald's.
Safeway.
Right to the right of McDonald's, yeah.
So
It's right
we
there.
tried to get as much out of it as we could. We tried to get them even to do all the AD upgrades. They pushed back very hard against that. And so the state allows you to, I think the total project cost is 50-some thousand, and the state allows you to make 25% of that as ADA requirements. They met us there because it's required, and they didn't do a dime above that. So there was a lot of things we tried to get out of the project that didn't come to fruition. The new awnings are gonna meet they haven't been installed yet.
Okay.
They're gonna meet the size standards. The lighting is dark sky compliant. Yeah, the question did come up of putting on stone. They pushed back pretty hard against that. They wanted to remove quite a few windows but they would have taken them below the threshold for transparency requirements, so we told them no. So they're not gonna remove any windows. So I will tell you, it was a very hard
Wow.
struggle in that one.
So what is the basic threshold to meet Sandy South to make them put up timbers, per se?
I don't know if the code really explicitly calls that out.
Okay, because I was thinking on the Funtime RV, that was one thing that kept them from extending it, down
Yeah.
further
What
on
triggers
Proctor.
it?
Yeah,
So,
Is it a dollar amount or?
because you said that then they would come under the landscaping.
Remodeled the existing store to be Sandy South.
so the McDonald's, just so
That
you
looks
guys are aware,
1950.
that's gonna start to get a huge a $300,000 facelift. And they're taking the whole exterior of the building off.
Which one?
So in that case, James worked on that one.
McDonald's.
We told them, you have to meet Sandy style, because they're basically stripping the whole outside of the
Oh, you're
building.
talking about the motel?
No, the
McDonald's.
The
McDonald's.
McDonald's.
Oh, yeah.
So the
No,
McDonald's
Nice.
is gonna incorporate timbers, stone, everything.
That
What
was
is
it's gonna
good.
look like
when do you
Sandy
think that's
South.
gonna happen?
What's that?
When
It's
do you
been
think it's gonna
approved.
happen?
I'm not sure when,
Uh,
they were really pushy to get it. They were very excited to get it done, so.
I mean, I've seen it in your
assume
notes
it'd
for quite a
be
while, so that's why I
soon.
was just wondering. It seemed to me like
I
something
think their
happened.
goal was September or October.
Wow.
It took down the big French fry thing, huh? What, and they're resiting the motel? That's just
They're resetting the motel and putting up awning, or what do you, I'm blanking on the name of them, like the decorative features above the windows, the little trellis awning things. They're doing that, and then they're putting on different siding material, because I think it was that vinyl siding before.
what,
And then
if
they're
we have
gonna
hardy
give it-
plank or something?
They're gonna put a hardy plank up now, and then they're gonna give it kind of a new paint theme as well. I think it'll look a lot better once it's done.
Hey, and then we were talking here about trying to have people comply and do what's right. And it's hard for me to do because I'm the restaurant. I'm not worried about the competition. But on the food carts, we gotta do something in terms of bringing that around. I mean, if I ask, if I put a canopy up that's down there, I would have code enforcement down in a day or two.
Yeah, they got approved for those canopies when it was originally approved. I didn't
Really?
approve it, so. That's all I'll say there.
Really?
Yeah, and so what you see for the screening on the bathrooms and everything, that was approved as it is. So it was approved as it is, basically. They did put one extra tiny canopy out there, and it looks just like the other one, and I wasn't gonna make that like the sword I'm gonna fall on. So I said, yeah, you can put that out there. I mean, it looked better actually than the one that was approved.
Yeah.
So it was like, I guess we could push the issue and not allow it, but I don't know. Yeah, it's I don't know. It does look pretty good for a food court compared to some I see. It doesn't look
It
as
could
good.
But the
If it's-
problem is when you come through and you have this standard for everybody else that's there, it really just smacks in the face on it, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, the original approval allowed for that big tent and allowed for the bathrooms to be done without stone or anything else, so.
So both of the tents?
No, the smaller tent I just allowed because they applied for it. I originally tied approval of the tent to upgrading the bathrooms to permanent bathrooms. And so that application was withdrawn. And then about a year or two later, the property owner applied again. And at that point, it was kind of discussed at council in between those applications whether the sunset date should no longer exist and the food cart should be removed. They said no, and they said that we shouldn't tie future tenant approvals to the upgraded bathroom, so I just allowed it.
That was city council.
That was city council where they were basically saying that the upgraded bath, yeah.
Yeah.
That was like a year and a half, 2 years ago maybe. It was a while ago now. A lot of half of the council members that are now on council weren't even around when that was all kind of done. Yeah,
Well,
I
the
don't
whole
know.
food cart thing, we're still learning. Like even in Portland now, they're starting to screen around them, like
Right.
with vegetation and stuff to make it look nice.
Yeah, they're a unique thing. You know,
Yeah.
since they're mobile units, our building official doesn't do anything with them.
Mm-hmm.
So the only people that do anything with them are the planning department and the fire marshal.
But that just
And
goes.
the health department, sorry,
But that
the health
just goes to what we just approved tonight. We could say every business is unique, because every business is. So, anyway, I'm glad we approved it. I think it's a good improvement for the use on that corner. I just wish we could have had that extended a little further down the front, but maybe he will.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
All right, I move we're adjourning.
Second.
Moved and second to adjourn. All in favor, say aye.
Yippee.
Aye.
Yippee or howdy or whatever.